Who would like to go first?
You want to go junior to senior?
Sure.
That's a very hierarchical approach. Non-hierarchical.
Okay.
So I'm the junior member. I'm a postdoc. My name is Emily Waterman, and I work at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the Center for Research on Children, Youth, Families, and Schools. And my research is on sexual and dating violence among adolescents and young adults, specifically studies of risk and protective factors for those types of violence, as well as evaluations of prevention programs. And my fun fact, I've been quite quiet about this around SRA and other professional settings, but I am an amateur bird watcher, and I've identified over 200 species of birds.
Wow, very cool. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Fact. Okay, who would like to introduce themselves next?
I guess I would be next if we're going in order, since we don't have our assistant professor. So I'm Moin Syed. The way you remember how to pronounce my name is Moin, like coin, and psychology, Syed, like psychology educator, Syed. And I am an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Minnesota. I've been associate with tenure since 2015. So I'm like middling associate professor now. And my research is broadly on identity and personality development amongst ethnic minority youth from adolescence to emerging adulthood. Fun fact, I'll give my fun fact that makes the most sense in this context of our discussion today, which is that I had a really rough first year of college and ended up with a 1.3 cumulative GPA by the end of my first year and was kicked out of school. And then took some time off and went to community college for a while and had a long wandering path before I ended up going on and finishing my degree and going on to get my PhD. So I say that in this context because I think that's a relatively atypical path for a lot of professors, and it's one that has led me to have less respect for a lot of hierarchies, especially hierarchies having to do with institutional prestige.
Great, thanks very much for sharing. That's an awesome story on resiliency. Amanda, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Amanda Rose, and I am a full professor at the University of Missouri. I started my job here in 1999, and I was trying to remember, let's see, I would have gotten tenure 2005 and then promoted to a full professor in 2012, or my dates are close anyway. I study adolescent friendships, and especially gender differences in communication styles in friendships and implications for adjustment, particularly emotional well-being. In terms of fun facts, I guess one relevant for this context is I think that it is helpful for people to know that people can be full professors and have lives outside of academia. I do have a husband and 2 teenagers and a 2-year-old yellow lab puppy. The teenagers say the puppy is my favorite child, so I refuse comment on that. And I also have hobbies outside of that as well, including that I dance a lot.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks again to our panelists for making the time to be here. We truly appreciate it. So first, I'd like to start with some prepared questions. I solicited questions from the Emerging Scholars Committee and from the font of knowledge that is Twitter. So we have a great set of prepared questions, and I'd like to just go through some of them. So panelists, it's up to you how you'd like to respond. If you feel like you have something pertinent to say, please feel free to jump in. If you are not really sure that you can speak to that particular question, that's no problem, and then we'll just go from there. And remember, for everyone listening, to please use the chat function if there are questions that occur to you as you're listening. So the first question we have is, what do you do as a graduate student when your advisor recommends a graduation timeline that doesn't really fit with your expectations for the timeline? So for example, if your advisor thinks that you should be finishing in 5 years, but you as a graduate student were planning on finishing in fewer.
I don't mind starting out because I can speak to that question both. I remember when I was a second-year student, having that conversation with my advisor that I thought that I should be able to get through graduate school pretty quickly, and he thought it would take longer than I thought it would. And then on the other side, I've had that conversation with a number of students. What I have gathered through the years is that as nice as it is for the student and the advisor to be on the same page with a very concrete plan of how long it will take to get through graduate school, there are, even if the advisor and the student said, yes, 4 years, absolutely, we'll get done, it's hard to guarantee if that will really happen, because who knows whether the research ideas will progress as you hope they will for the student. Who knows if you will decide that you're as comfortable putting in as many hours as it would take to get to 4 years, or maybe once you're there for a while, you may have a partner that you're aligning your career with your partner. There's so many things that can happen that in a way it's not as helpful or necessary to make a certain commitment to a number of years as it seems like when you're in that situation. Because I remember when I was in that situation, it really felt important and necessary because it's difficult to deal with ambiguity. So what I would suggest, and other people may have different perspectives, but if you are wanting to get through your program quickly and efficiently, rather than devoting a lot of time and energy to negotiating with your advisor about how many years it will take, just get to work. You're going to need to get a master's done, you're going to need to get your comps done, you're going to need to do your dissertation. So the more diligently you can do that work and the more quickly you can get it done well, the quicker you're going to finish. So it might be one where actions speak louder than words, and if your advisor sees you working really hard and moving through things really quickly, then a different timeline may become more feasible to your advisor than they felt originally.
Yeah, that was a great response. I think just to build on that, it sort of depends on when this conversation is taking place. I think there's a big difference between an incoming graduate student saying, I want to be done in 4 years, and an advisor saying, no, it actually probably should take about 5, and then someone being sort of close to done and wanting to finish in 4 years versus an advisor saying, no, I think you need another year. So I think the conversation would look different depending on what it is. With the former, because Rose really spoke to the latter, I think, pretty well. With the former situation with new graduate students, I guess I have a broader point to make about hierarchies, is that I guess they're not inherently bad and you can't avoid them. They do exist. It is the case that with new graduate students coming into my research lab, I have more information about how the process operates than they do. So there is a different access to information, and obviously there's a power differential. So it's not the fact that there is a hierarchy, it's more about how sometimes the hierarchies are put in place or how the power is abused. So I just think that's an important thing to separate. So I do have students sometimes who think they can just go right through in 4 years, and then I have to explain, well, it might seem that way from your perspective, but here's all the things that have to happen. As Rose said, there's a number of milestones you have to hit. So I think it's good to have that conversation early on about what is the expected timeline, and why is that the timeline, not just because it's an arbitrary year amount. I'm going to stop there.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much. Unless anyone has anything to add, I can move on to the next question. The next question is, what if someone that you're working with who outranks you is using a research practice that you feel is unethical or maybe just a little bit shady, one of those kind of gray areas, seems maybe not okay, but you're working with them and they outrank you? How to handle that sort of situation?
Okay, I had some ideas for this one, so I can start. I think this is where one of my biggest advice to folks who are just starting out in grad school is to really collect mentors, like, you would baseball cards or something like that. And I think this is a situation where having multiple trusted mentors is really important, because say, for instance, if it's one of your mentors who you think is engaging in the unethical or shady practices, you're going to want to talk to someone else about it. I know that some universities do have things that protocols around what to do, but I think really talking to that second or third mentor about how to handle the situation, because I really think ideally in this scenario, someone would be willing to take this on without using your name. would be awesome if you were a grad student. So I think just having those multiple trusted mentors.
I definitely endorse that point. You want to have multiple people, mentors, faculty members or advanced graduate students, postdocs, whatever, other mentors. But it's also the case with these kinds of issues, shady or potentially problematic practices, that sometimes the people who are engaging in them don't know that they're shady or problematic. Especially, you know, as the open science movement has really taken steam, more and more we're recognizing that a lot of the research practices that all of us or many of us were socialized into have a lot of problems. So things that we sort of treated as normative and even the correct way to do research, we're now seeing is not really the correct way to do research and has a lot of problems. And so I guess I would back up a little bit and just say, first, don't necessarily assume ill intent. Sometimes there is, and sometimes it's clear when someone's engaging in highly unethical behavior. But if they're, you know, with some aspects of p-hacking or questionable research practices, it's possible that that person doesn't necessarily understand the problems that they're engaging in. And so one strategy is to sort of raise the issue about, oh, you know, I read an article recently about the problems that are associated with this particular practice. Like, everyone does this, and we used to think it was good, but it looks like there's some problems with it. And kind of try to broach it in that way, like something you just discovered yourself, that you just learned about this and you're wondering about it. And then you can see how that person responds. If that person responds and says, oh, no, that's not a concern at all, this is the way we do things, then you might want to do some of like what Emily was talking about and seek out another mentor who would be able to kind of help you navigate the situation.
I agree with both of those comments, and I think also that there's a link with the severity of the behavior that's relevant as well, because if the you're like as developmentalists, if you see something happening where you feel like kids are really at risk or getting, you know, hurt, you're probably going to do whatever it takes to make sure the situation is rectified. If it's something that is a gray area and you're not sure, you know, you also have you have an obligation to do what you think is right scientifically, but you also have an obligation to look out for yourself and protect yourself so you can get into a position in the hierarchy that you can make, you know, broader change. And so if it's not totally clear and you have sought advice, you've shared the information with someone, you know, an advisor or another faculty member, I also think that it's that, especially for graduate students, they shouldn't feel that they're really dropping the ball or doing something wrong if they don't sort of go all out to, you know, make sure everybody knows and bring it all, you know, all into light, because there are a lot of gray areas. And so letting someone with more experience know, I think, is pretty critical when it's a gray area. But it's also okay to look after yourself and your own career, because that's the only way you'll get, you know, up to a position where you can make broader change.
Thanks. The next question is how to negotiate for a medical leave or a family leave if your university has a policy in place to support it, but your department kind of discourages it or has this informal culture where that's not really something that they're supportive of despite the university policy.
Well, I can say before you even get in that position, ideally you will have found out about that before you've taken the position. Now, sometimes it's irrelevant because you need a position, whether it's in graduate school or as a postdoc or an assistant professor. And so if it's not, you know, ideal, you may end up taking the position anyway. And people debate about whether it is strategic to ask about these things when you're interviewing, but certainly after you've been given an offer for your graduate school, postdoc, or faculty position, before you accept, this is your time to find out all the information you can about this sort of thing, even if it feels like it may be a while off, you know, and talking about both the official policies and about what's typical, and perhaps like sharing with the person that will be your advisor or the person that will be your chair what you might want to do, you know, when that time comes, and get their feedback. So I'll let others. I've been really fortunate to be in departments where this hasn't been that much of an issue. Some others may have more insight onto what to do once you're in that situation. But I certainly think being kind of preemptive and trying to find these things out even before they're, you know, they're especially before they're urgent, can be helpful.
Yeah, I would just add, I guess, again, I have a broader sort of point related to all these questions, I think, which is about really the importance of communication and not relying on minimal sources of information. So not just having one person, just one advisor or one person who's telling you these things and that you're listening to only that one person. You want to be able to make sure you're engaging with and talking to a lot of different potential people in your department who are responsible for these decisions. So the question was phrased as the department is against or not supportive of taking leaves. And so it sort of depends on where that information is coming from. It could be coming from the advisor, it could be coming from the department chair, it could be just a general sentiment, it could be lore that was passed down over generations, you know, so it's important to like, where is that actually coming from? But large departments will have sort of an HR person in the department, usually a staff position. Smaller departments will have one maybe in the college or something. But that's a good person to talk to, and that's a good, especially if you're interviewing for a position, that's a potential person you could ask to speak to, because that person will tell you what actually happens, what the laws are, and things like that. And so that's a way to get more accurate information rather than it being filtered through what's being preferred at the departmental level.
Great. I think those are great points. Next question is, what advice do you have for graduate students who are at an R1 institution, but who discover that they would really rather work in a small liberal arts college or some other type of institution, a non-R1 type of position after graduation? What advice do you have for those students?
Go ahead. Someone else can go ahead.
I could, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with jumping in, and this kind of ties back to the importance of, or lack maybe, importance of being exactly in agreement with your advisor. We're talking about number of years. You know, these days, to getting a job at a small liberal arts school typically involves publications. Certainly getting a job at an R1 university involves publications. Some advisors at R1 universities don't want their students to teach, but what I have seen is that most advisors at R1 universities are cool with their graduate students getting teaching experience, as that also helps you get a job. And so it's awesome when you and your advisor are on exactly the same page about your goals, but as you're like up until the moment when you apply for jobs, you want to get publications and you want to get teaching experience. And so you can just focus on doing those things, because that is going to help you get any job. And then you know, sometimes you don't know, like most people apply to a whole range of jobs, you know, small liberal arts jobs and R1 jobs, both because it's hard to get jobs, but also sometimes you don't know exactly what you want until you go on an interview and sort of see what it would really be like. And so I feel like, and I have seen it feel like such an emotional like stressor between when students feel like, well, my advisor wants me to, you know, be like the best researcher in the world, but I really like teaching, you know, but actually I think it's possible to kind of disengage from that conflict, and the day-to-day goals are going to be pretty darn, you know, similar. And if you focus on those, you might get more done, feel happier, feel more productive, and not feel as, you know, as stressed. Although again, people differ in their comfort with ambiguity, and I know some people might just be so stressful not talking about it with their advisor, they might have difficulty doing that.
So I'm on the job market right now, so a lot of the things, my responses will probably reflect that process. But you know, at the end of the day, it's getting a job at a small liberal arts or an R1 is exactly what Amanda said, just research and then teaching. So if it was me, I think the practical advice is just get one more class under your belt. Like, you know, at the end of the day, it's really just that simple, I think, because you want both of those things. So, and I think this is one where you can take control of really your own education and training and just say, you know, no, I really think I need those 2 classes that I've taught, or those 3 classes instead of one.
I think it's important to remember that about 98% of graduates don't go into R1 positions. You know, I just made that number up, but you know, the vast majority do not. And so that's not the normative path, even though sometimes we treat it as such. And I think the response that were given previously are spot on, that, and even at R1 universities, teaching is valued. It's important. We have not offered jobs to candidates before because they did not have teaching experience or their teaching was clearly subpar. It does happen. It is considered in the tenure process. So it's not the case, again, it's kind of a myth that R1s don't care about teaching. That's not at all true. Of course, it varies. It's weighted relatively less than research is, at least at the University of Minnesota, but it doesn't mean it's not important. So, 30% of my job description is supposed to be teaching, which includes mentoring, working with undergraduates, graduate students, teaching in the classroom, et cetera. So teaching is important even if you're going into R1 universities. And so I think it's important just to work on excelling and developing your teaching and your research no matter what position you're going to go into, and that gives you the most options.
And that prompted me to think too that one thing that the student and their advisor in this scenario should be able to get on the same page on is mentoring undergraduates in research. So for small liberal arts college, they'll love you if you've done like supervised lots of honors thesis and make students, and there's so many undergraduate research opportunities at most universities, and typically the advisor will get on board with this too because it means more data is being analyzed, projects are being pursued, and there's this sort of irony too, where even if the graduate student is doing most of the mentoring, there's credit for mentoring the graduate students that go to the lab, and so it reflects positively on the advisor too. So that might be an area for students who really want a small liberal arts school to dig in on, that would be supported by their advisor and would pay off.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you raised that. We think of teaching narrowly as classroom teaching, but that's not the only teaching context. Most universities consider mentorship and supervision of research assistants in the teaching bucket of things. And so, and it certainly speaks to your ability to engage a small number of students, which is what you do at a small liberal arts college. So yeah, that's a great point.
Great, thanks a lot. The next question is, how do you find out about any department rivalries or department drama so that you can stay out of it and not accidentally get roped in with it when you've joined a new department? So you just joined a new department in whatever capacity. How do you kind of figure out what messes to stay out of?
Ask the graduate students. They always know.
I think about my son started middle school last year, and he said his plan for middle school was to fly under the radar, which as someone who studies adolescent peer relationships, I can see the benefits of that strategy. And of course you want to engage in your department, but this was his strategy for entering middle school. And I think there's something to be said for that. When you get into a new department, of course you want to make friends and make connections, but spending a little time, number of months kind of observing. I mean, I'm a peer relations researcher, so I like to observe peer interactions, but observing the interactions and the dynamics probably will give you a better idea versus becoming like best friends with someone or in alignment with someone immediately. Kind of doing your work and be friendly and just paying attention before diving in too strongly one way or the other.
This piece of advice is specific to new faculty joining a department, but I would highly recommend reaching out to the other faculty and inviting them out to lunch or out for coffee for a chat for an hour. And just make sure you have a personal connection with everyone in the department and just talk to them and see, what do they like? And then ask about, what's the atmosphere in the department, or is there much collaboration in the department, or, kinds of things like that, and see what comes up. But that will help you understand sort of the lay of the land a little bit. And usually, I'm currently in a very positive environment, to be clear. My department's highly functional, but I've been in places where it hasn't been as functional, and I've observed them. And usually when there are major problems and major fights in camps, that becomes known very quickly. It's kind of obvious to be able to see them. And so what I try to do always when I'm talking to prospective job candidates and new colleagues is really talk about our positive environment, how we don't have major battles within the department. You don't have to worry about different camps. And so really reassuring, you don't have to be wondering, what do I need to navigate? But I still think it's a good idea to fly under the radar. I don't think I ever spoke at a faculty meeting while I was untenured. I could have. It wasn't that I'm just going to sit and listen and watch and observe. It certainly wasn't that I was discouraged from speaking, but that was, my general approach.
Right. I think, so as a relatively new assistant professor, I might be also able to see this. I think the flying under the radar thing is great, but remember that everyone in the department, no matter what side of whatever drama they may or may not be on, is going to be evaluating your materials for promotion and tenure. And so it doesn't do you any good to get involved in anything that's going on, because you never know who you might need to collaborate with later, or who might be reading your materials. So I think it's great to fly under the radar. I also think quite a bit of observational work at faculty meetings. I completely agree with Moyne in that respect. The next question is, how do you balance wildly different, conflicting advice about career-related materials? So maybe that's job market materials, maybe that's tenure package materials from more senior people. So if you're putting together some kind of career-related package and you're asking for advice from senior faculty, what do you do if they're telling you completely opposite things?
I can start for this one just because I'm the closest to it. I have gotten quite to the point where like one mentor will write something on your thing and then the next person will take it off, you know, and it's pretty funny. But I don't know if wildly different is, that might be a little dramatic, but definitely differing advice on how to do job market materials. And I think I always took the advice of, frankly, the mentor who's just been on more hiring committees and I know who regularly thinks and reads about those kind of issues. And then the other thing is I've noticed you can kind of tell when advice is more self-serving, like, oh, I did this when I did my job material, so you should too, as opposed to the mentor who says, I found overall when they do X, they get X results, and when they do Y, they get Y results. So I've kind of seen how they give me the advice.
Great answer.
Yeah, I also think that if you ask two people and you get wildly different advice, keep asking, because yes, there is variation in what people think that you should do, but at a very kind of broad level, when we look at a pile of job applications, there's a lot of similarity across them. And so by the time you ask like 4 or 5 different, mentors or your friends what their mentors think, you should start to get, something of a consensus. I also think that it's important to remember that, when you're applying for jobs, it's such an emotionally, volatile time. There's a lot of stress, and so things that when you are stressed, things that are small can seem really big. And so, perhaps like you mentioned, the idea of one person takes something out of the research statement, the other one adds it in, and takes it out and adds it in. This fragment or sentence is not going to determine whether you get the interview or not. So as important as it seems right then, really what matters is what's on your vita, and that's going to be 95% of determining whether, I think, of determining whether you are invited for an interview or not. And then kind of the details of, what to put in the cover letter. A lot of people don't read, a lot of people on committees don't read cover letters. What to put in the research statement or the teaching statements. It matters at the margin, so you want to take it seriously and do a good job, but you don't want to spend, you want to keep your eye on the big picture and don't kind of lose the forest for the trees and spend a lot of emotional energy on things that probably won't make a difference. Like, put that energy into writing the next paper because it will pay off more.
Great, thanks a lot. Next question is, what if you are in a department who has a problem person? So maybe this is someone who makes inappropriate comments that aren't really reportable. It's not exactly harassment, but just a problem person who makes uncomfortable comments, but they outrank you. How do you handle that situation?
I mean, I have turned down opportunities from people who I have heard are problematic in some way. And sometimes when that's something that could potentially be beneficial to your career, it's a hard decision, but I have, if a really trusted mentor has told me, like, this is not the best thing for you, I have turned down opportunities.
Yeah, I think it ties into some of the things we were talking about previously, like kind of learning the dynamics, and so kind of learning when an opportunity may have more costs than than it's worth. In terms of someone who's just kind of inappropriate or problematic in general, that's another time when the fly under the radar strategy might work out okay, that maybe you can manage just not to be around that person that much, or you wouldn't invite them to be on your committee, for example. But how you deal with this really does change, I think, at your stage of career. So as Caitlin was saying, when you're an assistant professor, you're in a vulnerable position, and clearly if there was something that you absolutely felt you needed to address ethically, you need to address it. But things that are more more kind of borderline, you need to get tenure in order to have the power to address it more effectively. Now once you have tenure, like as soon as I got tenure, even before I was a full professor, I felt like I had an obligation to look out for assistant professors and graduate students. And so my reputation probably moved pretty quickly from being just kind of agreeable and not very conflictual to someone who would really call people out when they made inappropriate statements. And so I think that sometimes when you don't have much power and you're lower in the hierarchy and it's really frustrating, kind of remembering that doing your job is what is going to get you to the place where you really can kind of call people out when they're inappropriate and diplomatically but directly address that behavior. It is pretty fulfilling when you get to that point and are able to do that.
I think a really important issue for any of these kinds of things is ensuring that you have allies in the department, and allies that you really trust, people that you're close to, that you can trust, that hopefully you can find those people. And that's especially important for those who come from underrepresented and marginalized backgrounds, really where they might be the only one, from their particular background, and sometimes might be experiencing some forms of discrimination or prejudice associated with that. And that can be really challenging if they don't feel like they have any allies in the department. It can be quite difficult to be able to deal with these kinds of situations. So I think it's often the case, again, it's true for starting graduate school, but also starting a faculty position, that you feel like you need to get to work right away, that you need to immediately be working on publishing papers or immediately developing, really innovative teaching methodologies and things like that. And that's true, you do need to be working on those things, but you also need to lay the sort of socio-emotional foundation of your position as well. And that's really important, that you spend time, understanding your environment as part of the understanding conflicts or battles within the department as well. Just really having a sense for what is going on and who can you potentially trust, and trying to cultivate relationships so that when something does happen, and something probably will, it might be minor, could be large, but something will go wrong in some way that you'll need some assistance with, that you feel like you have people that you can go to. So I think that's really important, versus sort of just putting your head down and saying, I'm just here to do my work. So it's a little bit of the opposite, fly under the radar, but also build connections. I think it's really important that you have the system in place when you need it, versus experiencing some kind of threat or some kind of problem and then trying to figure out who you can go to, right? That's not an optimal position to be in. So I think it's really important to, from the beginning, try to lay those foundations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And kind of to amend the fly under the radar point, I think that applies especially to anything that's really controversial, or like any hot topics, that maybe kind of like not getting involved in those is good. But certainly for work reasons and just emotional well-being, having connections and social support at work is huge. So building positive relationships, of course, is pretty critical.
Great, thanks. We have reached the last of the prepared questions. That means two things. For everyone who's listening, now is the time. Get your questions in on the chat box. So please feel free to ask questions. Again, I can moderate that. For our panelists, I had sent them this question in advance, so hopefully they'll all have something to say about this one. I've asked them to think about a hierarchy challenge that they faced in their current rank and how they handled it, and a situation they encountered in their previous rank, how that was handled. And last, now that they are at their current rank, would they have handled that at previous rank differently? So challenge at current rank, challenge at previous rank, would you have revised your method of handling the previous rank challenge? So whoever wants to jump in first, go ahead.
I tend to be the jumper inner first person, so I can do this. I think that a challenge that I had at pre-tenure was when I was hired in my department, my hire represented the beginning of building a developmental area. And for people who do developmental work, you know, there are some unique challenges with getting participants and building data sets. And so the idea that I might spend 2 years collecting data without publishing from that data, but then I would be able to publish 15 papers from that data. It turns out that that is really a strange idea if you don't understand developmental psychology. And I can see how it sounds a little strange, but it's like, well, no, just bear with me, because in 2 years I'll be able to publish 15 papers. I was not prepared for the idea that that would be met with some confusion, and so that was a challenge for me. And there were positives and negatives to the way I handled it. On the positive side, I had very good training and really good mentors, and I knew I was doing the right thing. And so I wasn't going to do like a really small data collection or a data collection with adults, even though I was interested in kids, or something that would get me a publication faster. And I'm really glad that I kind of stuck to what I knew was right in terms of my academic discipline, and did that. I don't know that it was really, really stressful, and I felt really bad about it. And I wish, looking back, there was a way that I could have felt better about it. And I think that, I was able to build some social support and things like that. The only thing I might have done differently is I might have been more assertive in trying to explain to the senior faculty that what I was doing was a good idea, rather than kind of waiting for them, to realize that. I also think that's kind of interlinked, because there's research showing that when women are more self-promoting, there's some backlash to that. So, it was a tricky situation. In terms of my current rank, since I'm a full professor, the only challenges there are that sometimes I wish I could do more in terms of protecting, assistant professors and postdocs and graduate students when they do have challenges, if they don't have a great, advisor, or I'm especially interested in gender issues. The pros and cons of academia are that we have a lot of freedom in what we do, and that's really great, because your chair can't come to your department and to your office and say, I don't like those findings, and you keep showing this about women or this group or that group, or you study this controversial topic, you won't have a job. But on the other hand, it means that a con is that there is a lot of freedom, and sometimes it's difficult in gray areas to enforce things, and that's frustrating that you can't do that. But I will say, and then I will turn the floor over, that's a challenge of being a full professor. But I always, when I teach professional development classes, I always just highlight that I think that being a tenured professor, and then probably especially a full professor, is just the best job in the world. And so being a graduate student, my advisor said to me, well, if you like being a graduate student, this means you're going to love being a professor. So I did like graduate school. I liked what I was doing, but it was stressful, and it was harder because I didn't know what I was doing. Being an assistant professor was harder. You worry about job security, where you're going to live, or this or that. But once you get tenure, you have 30 more years of a job where you have job security, you study the things that are interesting to you, to be generative. And so I know this was not the question, but I always try to make a plug whenever I can for, if you like the work and you're interested in it, and you like the research and you like the teaching, to kind of hang in there through the challenging times, because it does get to be easier, and the things that are hard get to be more enjoyable to do as you advance. But now we should get back to the actual question Caitlin asked.
All right, I'll go next. So as someone who does work with ethnic minority populations, I get called upon for diversity-related service all the time from my department, my college, my university, professional societies, local community people, random people I don't even know who they are, but they want something from me. You know, it's very, very common, and that happened from the very beginning as an assistant professor. And so that was a lot to negotiate. And so because of my interests and my expertise and my commitment to helping ethnic minority populations, I was always willing to do those things. And so I did a lot of service, both related to diversity and not related to diversity. But the vast majority of that service was uncompensated in any way. So I wasn't given anything for, you know, some service line on my CV. So you know, sometimes it could be running a half-day workshop or even a full-day workshop and not being paid for that necessarily, right? And so that was something I was doing as an assistant professor, and I felt like I should be doing, and especially service to societies like SRA, for example, sometimes requests assistance without any compensation. And so now that I am in a stronger position and realize, I guess at the time, I didn't realize just how problematic that was, that such work was being requested without any compensation, because it was a lot of additional work. But over the years, I realized that, and now basically, I don't always say no to things, but I do raise the issue. I say, you know, this is the kind of work that should be compensated in some way. And so I try to raise that, especially for other people who are not in that position, who feel a little bit more tenuous in their positions, who don't have as much power, that they hopefully, if they can change the systems where everybody's getting compensated for being on these committees in some way. Like, and just an example, to work like on the diversity committee with SRA, if you're part of that committee and you're meeting as part of the biennial meeting, usually you'd have to arrive a day earlier, which means you're paying for an extra night of hotel, right? And extra expenses and extra time away and things like that. And there's usually, again, no compensation attached to that. So it's like, if you want us to do that work, then you should be supporting that work and supporting our efforts to do that. So that was something that I changed my approach. And I definitely now, I wish I had done more now of what I do now then, of sort of raising the issue. Now, sometimes I do things I don't require compensation. It depends on what it is and who it's for. But I think as advice to others, it wouldn't have hurt my career if I had said no to some of those things. You know, it would have been okay to not do everything or to ask to be paid. It's okay to ask to be paid. You know, I know it's a hard, related to what Rose was saying too, in terms of, you know, there's definitely some gendered and racialized kind of aspects to being asked to be paid. But, you know, we are professionals who have expertise and we should be compensated for it. So that's sort of the challenge I experienced earlier. In terms of challenge now, really, I don't personally experience a lot of hierarchy challenge as an associate professor. I really don't in my everyday life. I've built up a lot of academic capital over my years. So really now my major concern is actually, how do I effectively use that capital to, similar to what Rose is saying, to help others who don't have as much power as I do. So it's really thinking about the challenge is how to deploy my privilege in a way that can break down some of the problematic aspects of hierarchies for graduate students and for other early career researchers. So I've been trying to do that and thinking of different ways, but I always feel like I'm not doing enough and I need to be doing more of that. And I have over time devoted more of my academic work to changing structures and policies and things that affect more people versus devoting time to my actual research, because I think that's something that I have the fortunate position to be in that I can do. So it's sort of, in some ways it's me being able to use my privilege, and in other ways it's sort of frustrating because I have to think about how to most effectively put that to work.
So I can go last. Mine's a little bit specific to program development and evaluation. I mentioned that I've been doing a lot of that in my current position. And one interesting challenge I've faced is that I have interviewed and hired and supervised a lot of folks who are very much older than me, like sometimes twice as old as I am. And that's been a really interesting experience for me. I think that doesn't necessarily come up if you're, well, you know, perhaps it does in the traditional academic sense, but when you're doing applied research, so most of these folks were research staff or program facilitators in our program. And sometimes, like, when you walk into an interview and someone's twice your age and they're like, "You're Dr. Waterman," And that's funny, and that's fine. But I think how I've really handled this is in our program development, really focusing on consensus decision making to whatever degree that I can. And really, secondly, just respecting the expertise of folks that are on our protocol. So, and really being willing to adjust protocols based on other people's ideas. So, for example, I have a now friend who is a program facilitator. I was supervising, but he has been teaching for longer than I've been alive. So he was really, really helpful in sort of developing our training protocols, whereas I provided more of the substantive expertise. I don't know if I'll think of how I handled this issue differently yet. We'll see in a couple of years.
Great, thank you so much. We actually don't have any questions submitted by the participants, so clearly we've solved it. We've answered all of it. We've done such a comprehensive job. But I would like to thank the panelists. Thank you so much, Emily, Amanda, and Moyne. I've really appreciated your sharing your time and sharing your wisdom with the rest of us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. As I said, this was recorded, so perhaps you're listening to this later as a recorded version. So it is thanks to the SRA Emerging Scholars Committee that we are able to put this on. We've been generously supported by the Executive Council. And if you have any further questions or any further things you'd like to discuss, please feel free to contact me. I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and I am the current chair of the Emerging Scholars Committee. You can feel free to email me at cavana81@msu.edu, and I'm going to put that right now in the comments as well, in case there's anything you'd like to follow up on. Otherwise, thank you so much to the panelists, and we hope that everyone has a great Monday.
Thanks, Kate.